The actor named Henry Cavill is one of the most famous actors of the last decade, starring in iconic roles as Superman in Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, and in Justice League, or his other iconic role as Geralt in the popular TV show called The Witcher, which was nominated for numerous Saturn Awards for Best Actor in a TV Series in 2021. And some of his other roles include roles in Mission Impossible and Enola Holmes. And every time Henry Cavill takes a movie role, he puts his heart and soul into it, but the movie industry doesn't show him the same amount of compassion. Throughout Henry Cavill's career, he has been screwed over by producers, studios, and even other actors. Like when the writers for The Witcher show said Henry Cavill was too passionate for adapting The Witcher show that it was overbearing, or how he quit The Witcher show to come back to play Superman in the DC universe, and then that same studio fired him as Superman only a week later and got a brand new Superman to replace him. And this issue was so blatant, it got to a point where the biggest movie of this year, Deadpool and Wolverine, even acknowledged how many times Henry Cavill has been screwed over.
We will treat you so much better than those shit on the street.
Henry Cavill's whole career has just been a series of movie studios taking his passion for granted throughout his whole entire career. And I want to explain to you how we got to this point. It first all started when he got his role as Superman. Now, getting the role of Superman will always make an actor's career and will forever cement them in movie history and comic book history. If we look back at some notable actors who played Superman, we see great actors like George Reeves, Brandon Routh, and the most iconic one, Christopher Reeves. By playing this iconic role, it made all these actors famous because he played the most popular character and the most loved superhero, Superman, which is what happened to Henry Cavill when he got this role, and will most definitely happen to the new actor playing Superman, David Cornsweet. But when Henry Cavill got this role, he was set up to be the next big thing. Obviously, Henry Cavill got hate because every time you get this iconic of a role like Superman, which might be the most iconic role to get in movie history, will obviously spawn haters for you who criticize your every move and will tear down your role because it just doesn't live up to their expectations of what Superman was for when they grew up. Like some of the things being said about Henry Cavill's appearance of Superman, where he doesn't have the S in his hair like the old Christopher Reeves had, or how his suit looked too textured, and just picking apart every move he had. Which this type of fan criticism has become more common nowadays, like a Tom Holland being criticized for dumb reasons because he's not Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and isn't the Spider-Man they grew up with. Or like how Daniel Craig became James Bond and everyone hated him for it because he had blonde hair. But when the Superman movie named Man of Steel finally came out, it was seen as a solid movie. Obviously, it had its problems, mainly the fact that it was released in the era where everyone was trying to be the Dark Knight, where all the movies that were coming out were all grounded and gritty, like The Amazing Spider-Man, like The Winter Soldier, like Iron Man 3, and the most blatant one, James Bond Skyfall, which was just literally the Dark Knight plot, but with James Bond as the main character. And the Man of Steel suffered the same fate, making it look all dark and faded with color, but at the same time, it was made by Zack Snyder and all his movies pretty much look like this. But this movie still did well, making $600 million at the box office and being in the top 10 most successful movies of 2013, enough for it to warrant a sequel. But at the time, no one really knew what was next for this franchise. Were they going to make a Superman 2, or were they going to go into Marvel's direction on making its own universe? Because at the time, Superman was just its own self-contained movie with no real references to other superheroes. But then we got announced Batman vs Superman, which was a big deal because this is some of the biggest superheroes going head to head in the same movie. And I have talked about the hype around this movie in one of my old videos, and it was insane. Everyone and their grandmas were talking about this movie when it was coming out. It had the potential to be the biggest movie of all time at that point. This was easily seen as a money farming glitch because having these iconic characters fighting each other, what else could you want? They possibly couldn't mess this up, right? Then the movie releases and everyone hates it. The backlash against this movie was crazy, and I'm not going to be going into detail because this topic, I could make a whole video on this topic alone. And there has already been so many videos talking about all this movie's problems. But you only need to know about two things about this movie for this video. One, this movie kills Superman in only his second movie he's ever been put in, killing the idea for Superman 2 and any potential sequel, as not being a possibility until we get Justice League, where he eventually gets revived there. And number two, since the movie got backlash by both critics and the fans, the studio got scared that maybe they made the wrong movie, and maybe they made the wrong move into taking the DC universe into this too dark and serious tone. Even though this movie was successful in making $800 million at the box office, it was not the big movie they wanted. So the studio decided to do a full stop and looked at all the plans and all the potential movies they had in the future and decided to switch it up. The start of the switch up was in the movie Suicide Squad. Even though it was in production, it was reworked by the studio because Batman vs Superman was so hated, and was told to take a different approach to this movie when the studio first saw the trailer come out, and they liked the musical aesthetic the trailer had that had been added in post-production, and wanted the movie to be more like Guardians of the Galaxy than this gritty approach they were already taking. And we know this because the director said this himself, that this movie was cut to pieces and the studio had so much interference in this movie that his original idea was not there anymore. So this movie ended up underperforming considering its expectations and would leave DC going to an MCU-like approach for Justice League. But after the sad passing of Zack Snyder's daughter, rest in peace, he stepped away from the Justice League movie and the studio brought in the Avengers director Joss Whedon. And Joss Whedon has all his own issues that I don't want to get into this video. You can look it up, but there's some pretty bad accusations he has out there. Even though they got Avengers director Joss Whedon, this movie still ended up underperforming, and DC Studios were in a complete scramble because they were like, we tried to be like Marvel and that didn't work, so what should we do? And this resulted in DC Studios being in a purgatory state where they had no idea what they wanted to be and what they were going to do, and pretty much fired every actor, notably Ben Affleck's Batman and Henry Cavill's Superman, behind closed doors, without actually firing them, quote unquote, and kind of left both actors high and dry. So DC Studios were looking for replacements for them and looking for new Batmans and looking for new Supermans, which means they were all fired without really telling them they're fired. That's why when we got the Superman cameo in Shazam, he didn't show his face in the movie because they didn't know who was going to be playing Superman. Was it Henry Cavill? Or was it going to be someone else? Because when it comes to job security in a cutthroat industry like Hollywood, taking a chance on a movie role is not what anyone wants. So in that same year, Henry Cavill decided to star in another show, The Witcher, based on a pretty famous book and a video game, which Henry Cavill had personally loved and had a lot of passion for this project and for playing the main character, Geralt. So season 1 of The Witcher released in 2019 with great success, and this was his new role that he would devote himself to. While the DC universe was going on without him, he was focusing on other movies like Mission Impossible and Enola Holmes, and obviously The Witcher show, until 2021 came around and he was brought back to revise his role as Superman in Zack Snyder's director's cut of the Justice League. And this movie was praised as a better version of the Justice League movie, but even though this movie garnered praise by the fans, it wasn't successful enough to bring back the Zack Snyder universe. We don't know for sure how successful this movie was because streaming numbers are a little bit of a blur that we, the average person, don't know unless the company outright tells us how many streams this movie got. And obviously, they didn't tell us. But even though Henry Cavill's performance in the movie was loved, his role as Superman was still in limbo. And in that same year of 2021, season 2 of The Witcher came out and was loved, and Henry Cavill even was nominated for a Saturn Award for his performance in season 2 as Geralt. But there was trouble in paradise for this show, because even though Henry Cavill was passionate for the original source material, the writers and producers didn't feel the same way. They were deciding to stray further away from the original story Henry Cavill loved, and he felt like he was losing his way with the show, because this isn't really the story he signed up for, neither was the story he was really pushing for. Obviously, we got later reports that the studio thought Henry Cavill was too overbearing and how he wanted the story to be more original to the original book and the original games, that the writers and Henry Cavill ended up clashing heads. But this news wasn't really widespread at the time until 2022 when Black Adam came out. Now, the Black Adam movie is a pivotal piece into Henry Cavill's career. The Black Adam movie was a DC movie starring The Rock, who at this time was at the height of his stardom and was really passionate for getting this movie made, that he had been working on this movie to get made for about 15 years. But even though he was passionate for this project, he had DC Studios in the palm of his hands because The Rock at this point was a pretty big actor at this time. Since The Rock was such a big star, and let The Rock kind of be in charge of DC Universe going forward. The Rock had so much power in the DC Universe that he was pulling strings for other movies in the DC Universe. Like Shazam was supposed to have Black Adam face against Shazam, but The Rock said no, I want to do my own movie, and Shazam had to go in another direction, and we know that because Shazam director said that himself, that there was a lot of studio interference into what Shazam 2 ended up becoming. But Black Adam was supposed to be DC's big win, and kind of the new start to the new DC universe. So they put a huge marketing budget into this movie with having Fortnite skins, Mr. Beast ads, and so many other crazy ads like being in Roblox. But what The Rock was fighting for behind the scenes was bringing back Henry Cavill Superman back for a post-credit scene where they would tease Black Adam versus Superman. So when Black Adam ended up releasing and everyone saw Henry Cavill as Superman back once again, it was a huge surprise to everyone because he hadn't been in a DCEU movie since 2017, and at this point it was 2022, so that's a pretty big time gap. And then on top of that, Henry Cavill announced on social media that he would be coming back as Superman and he will be quitting The Witcher to focus his attention on Superman, which was big news. It was being reported on regular news stations. So for Henry Cavill to be back as Superman, it was huge news for him to come back as such an iconic role as Superman. But that announcement didn't last too long because the film Black Adam ended up underperforming. Now there are different reports on what the financials were for this movie. Most people were saying this movie lost money because of its budget and its crazy high marketing budgets, but The Rock said it made a profit of $50 million. But The Rock is obviously a biased source, so it's up to your choice if you want to believe him or not. Since this movie underperformed, the DC universe was finally broken on this current iteration of the DC universe, deciding to go into a complete different direction with James Gunn's new DC universe, which made once again Henry Cavill high and dry because he had publicly quit The Witcher to come back as Superman, which meant the two franchises that he was working for in the past decade were both gone in 1 week, leaving him in the current position where every big franchise he has been in has shafted him and has taken his kindness for granted. The Witcher franchise took his passion for the original story for granted, and DC Studios took his performance as Superman for granted. Hopefully in the future, he doesn't have to deal with all these studio interferences because he is generally a great actor, but he has been stuck between the Superman role not giving him complete security like other superhero roles give to other actors. But hopefully he has a more successful career going forward and gets more movie roles that don't take his passion for granted because he genuinely deserves it. But let me know your thoughts on how Hollywood gave Henry Cavill with the cold shoulder down in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe because 99% of the people who watch me aren't subscribed. So don't be that 99%, be that 1%. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope to see you guys next time. Later, hater. Peace.